Everybody, good to see you all. Today I've been shown around the Moana Nui Kiwa hub and seen the impressive support it's providing to the local community in South Auckland. The place was buzzing with over 100 people there, dozens of tables filled with donated clothes, food and other goods that are being shared. It's an incredible effort, and it's so heartwarming to see the community rallying around to help others. Communities coming together to support each other in times of need is a story that we see play out time and time again across New Zealand. And I want to acknowledge the volunteers and the workers from that centre and others across Auckland and other parts of New Zealand for the care that they've shown to people who in many instances have lost most of their stuff, are in desperate need. When I became the Prime Minister, I said that I wanted the government's immediate focus to be on the bread and butter things that matter most to New Zealanders in the here and now. The events of the last week highlight the importance of that decision. It's been a lot, and it's been a lot on top of the last few years. First with COVID and then the economic tail that was caused by that. So I get that households are thinking hard about their budgets and businesses about their costs. The number one priority for my government is the cost of living. So my first announcement today as Prime Minister is about helping to take the edges off that and working hard to deliver extra support to families and businesses. Today I can announce that the government will extend the 25 cents per litre petrol excise duty cut to the 30th of June. That will reduce the average 60 litre tank of petrol by $17.25. For a 40 litre tank, it reduces it by $11.50. We'll also extend half-price public transport fares to the end of June, saving an average person who pays two $5 fares a day $25 a week. And road user charges discounts for diesel will be reintroduced and continue until the 30th of June as well. These discounts were due to be phased out in the coming months. But with global inflation pressure forecast to keep our rate around the 7% mark for longer, it's important we keep providing support to families and businesses who need it. This is a start. It's a meaningful step in an ongoing series of measures to help with some of the most persistent cost pressures facing families and businesses. Reducing the cost of fuel excise and public transport was a good candidate for early action because it's a major cost for nearly everybody, and we know how to do it and we know that we can do it quickly. It's also important for those experiencing the flooding here in Auckland, which is putting extra stress and financial pressure on families. This policy alone won't solve the cost of living crisis that we face, but it will make a difference. And right now I know that every little bit helps. I'm joined today by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Transport, and we're happy to answer your questions. If you have questions on the flooding, we'll do those after we've talked about the transport.
Prime Minister, you were standing in a flood-stricken. You just said that this is you're a bread and butter government. What are you going to do to bring down prices of food?
Look, we acknowledge that food is a major challenge. This announcement that we're making today will have an impact. Petrol prices fuel prices, I should say, do have an impact on the price of food. So this is something that we can do quickly that will make a contribution to that.
No, it's not new. What else could you do?
Well, it's certainly new in the sense that if we didn't do it, the price of those things would continue to go up as those costs came back into the system.
Are you looking at anything else? On the food side of things?
Well, we're going through a budget process, of course, and cost of living is going to be at the centre of that.
You are standing in a flood-stricken city, devastated by climate change. How do you marry that up with extending a subsidy on fossil fuel?
Government has an extensive climate change program underway. We are absolutely focused on reducing emissions. The public transport reductions, for example, that we've put in place today are a positive step in terms of getting more people to use public transport. We've got extensive work around the electrification of the vehicle fleet. We've got a lot of work happening to reduce our emissions overall as a country in the electricity generation space and in a whole range of other areas. But we also have to acknowledge that right here and right now, the increase in fuel costs is putting a significant amount of pressure on families who have no choice but to continue to fill up the car.
You say that this is affecting families and it's bread and butter stuff, but numbers show that the fuel tax cuts benefit those on the higher who earn the most 3 times more than those who are on the lowest income. So how is this actually beneficial?
Look, anything that we do that reduces the cost of living is going to have a different impact on different households. This is something that we can do quickly. We know that for households on fixed incomes, for example, they don't have a choice but to fill their car up. They rely on that to get to work. It's a fixed cost that they simply cannot avoid, and so this will make a difference for them.
And Finance Minister, you have ruled this out, and then you ruled it out, and then you ruled it out some more. Why are you coming back to this?
Because we've got a new Prime Minister, and he asked all ministers to go away and look at what we could do to get our focus onto the cost of living issues. I took that responsibility seriously, went away with the Minister of Transport and others, and came back to the Prime Minister with this proposal. It's important that we do, as the Prime Minister's just said, deal with the here and now as well as the long term. We know, because we've had this running, that we can extend it relatively quickly. And while, yes, it's about filling up the car or taking the bus, it's also about the overall budgets that people have. And we do know, as the Prime Minister's also said, that the cost of fuel, and diesel in particular, is a big factor in the cost of food. So when we think about what's the best thing that we can do quickly, this is it.
Right, so what was on the chopping block for you if you've been able to find $718 million down the back?
So where we found that from was what's called the October baseline update for those public finance geeks out there. That's essentially what we do every 6 months as a government. We go back through the money we've previously allocated and we ask the question, do we still need this? We did that exercise and we found sufficient funding to be able to fund this extension. Now, this extension takes us through till the end of June. It won't escape anybody that that's when the new budget period starts at the beginning of July. And so we will take a look through the budget process at what is the best way to be able to support New Zealanders with the cost of living.
So why not use that spare money to instead borrow less and take upward pressure off mortgage rates?
As the Prime Minister's already indicated, we've got to strike a balance here. You know very well that we want to make sure that we keep the fiscal picture strong, that we support monetary policy with our fiscal policy. We also have to make sure we support New Zealand families and households to be able to take the hard edges off the cost of living crisis they're living through. The overall picture of what we're doing is supporting what we're trying to do overall with inflation. And bear in mind, this actually reduces the rate of CPI.
But
A few weeks ago, you was
up to about $8 in the supermarket. When you see that, when you do your own shopping, Grant or whoever, does that make your eyes water? Because like some people can afford one, but you know what I mean. So
The cost of food, as the Prime Minister's already acknowledged, we know is one of the major issues facing New Zealanders. Everybody can see it. You can go to the supermarket ourselves and see it. We hear it from the families and the communities around us. If we want to make a quick difference, if we want to be able to take these hard edges off, we've got something here that both is a significant cost to households, but also a cost in the production of food. So we understand, and the best and the quickest thing we can do is this.
A few weeks ago, Mr. Robertson, you were saying that an extension was stopping the extension was the right thing to do. Now you're saying and adamant that extending the fuel tax cut and half-price public transport is the right thing to do. Did you get it wrong?
Things have changed. We've got a new Prime Minister who's asked us to redouble our efforts on the cost of living. That money that we were able to find through the baseline update is money that has already been indicated could be used for a number of things, could have been put into the budget process, but we've got an issue in the here and now. Inflation, it's steadied, but it hasn't come down significantly. We know New Zealanders are facing this cost of living crisis every day. We've taken another look. We have changed our decision, we're not denying that at all, but we've taken another look and we acknowledge the circumstances New Zealanders are in and we should do everything we can to help them.
Did you consider raising benefit levels?
That's happening anyway on the 1st of April.
One of the issues with the public transport subsidy was that councils like this were just going to up their fares, so they'll pocket that money. What are you going to do to make sure that it actually goes through to public transport users?
We'll work closely with public transport providers here in Auckland but around the country as well. They've all welcomed the additional support that we've been providing through this program and through what we've signalled going forward with a targeted approach as well. We'll be very determined as we apply this money that people who are using public transport see the benefit and see their fares reduce. And it is significant. As the Prime Minister said before, for someone who's taking a couple of $5 trips each working day to get to and from work, it's potentially a saving of up to $25 per week.
Minister, what will happen to the proposed Auckland transport fare increase that has already been announced?
The setting of fares at the local level is a matter for local public transport authorities. So that is up to Auckland Transport as it is up to councils in other areas. Their fare increase in this case was around about 6% from memory on a fare. So a fare that was perhaps $2 previously would go to $2.12. It is their decision as to how they cover those costs. The step that we are taking here is a really significant one, and it halves the cost of what people are paying, whatever the baseline fare is.
Prime Minister, you said right here, right now, this is what needs to happen, this extension. Does that mean that right here, right now, this government is putting bread and butter, cost of living, ahead of climate change?
No, absolutely not. As I've indicated, our work on climate change continues. We still have an extensive emissions reduction program. In reality, the cost of a tank of gas going up by 25 cents a litre, if that was to happen straight away, wouldn't reduce the amount of fuel being consumed by households. They'd still have to find that money from somewhere, and it's at a time when they often can't find that extra funding. So this is easing some of the financial pressure, but our work to reduce emissions will be continuing.
On climate change, you said you're doing a lot. Why then do you have a fiscally neutral stance on climate change, i.e. all the emissions trading scheme revenues, all the fee rebates revenues are then paid out, but you're not using the balance sheet to actually solve these issues longer term?
Look, happy to have a more detailed conversation about that in due course. We've got, further work to do around climate change. We'll continue to debate those issues. I haven't looked at that particular issue that you've asked me about in detail at this point.
Is there pressure, just moving on to floods? Is there pressure on the government from insurance?
Yeah,
I'm going to duck away between you two.
Just a couple quickly on the extension. I mean, for example, a government department like MFAT on their website urging other governments against any fossil fuel subsidies. Is this hypocritical?
No, not at all. Look, we acknowledge that in the long term we want to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Our work to do that continues. This is an immediate here and now issue for Kiwi households, though. They're still having to fill their car up each week. They're still having to travel. They're still having to get their kids to school and go to work. And this helps to ease some of that pressure in the short term.
Did you consider at all only doing half price public transport and not the fuel tax cut?
Look, we looked at a range of options, and in fact we canvassed those options when the 25 cent reduction was introduced in the first place. We have to look at the fact that for most households they still have a significant dependence on being able to fill the car up in order to get around, and in many cases public transport isn't an option for them, and so we have to make sure we're providing support to as many people as possible.
So did you consider that? Sorry, Prime Minister, did you consider?
As I've indicated, we canvassed all of those options at the time, and as a team we landed on this package as the best option that gets the balance right. So in terms of extending the existing package that we've got, it still has the same balance now that it did when we introduced it in the first place, and I believe it's the right balance.
Will it be extended further? Will you rule out extending it further?
As the Minister of Finance has indicated, we've extended through to June. That's when the new budget period begins, and so we've got a budget to go between now and then.
Is there pressure on the government to call the floods a natural disaster so EQC kicks in, and is that something that you've considered on?
That's not an issue that I've specifically canvassed at this point. My understanding is that the work that the insurance companies are doing, they're cooperating very well together. They're working to provide timely resolution for people. I've spoken to some of the insurance companies. I know the Minister of Finance is also speaking to the insurance companies as well, to make sure that people get as timely a response from around insurance as possible.
Do you think we'll ever be in a position where you'll be able to take climate change action that hurts consumers and that's okay? Or will it always be that you can't hurt consumers if you're going to take climate change?
Look, I think we have to acknowledge what we're dealing with right at the moment, that additional measures that add costs to households at a time when they're facing significant additional costs caused by inflation does place some constraints on what government can do. So as you know, and we've had arguments or debates, I should say, over many years about things, I'm never in the rule in, rule out, forever, for all time category, just about anything. But actually I think right now the focus has to be on making sure New Zealanders can get through the economic situation that we're in now.
Just back on the
Prime Minister,
Yes.
are you happy with the changes there, and you're meeting with Albanese next week, is it? Can you tell us through a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd like to welcome the 501's decision that the Australian government have recently announced. This is something that the New Zealand government has been working with Australia to achieve for quite some time now. It's a very welcome first step. Of course, there are issues that we want to continue to work with Australia on, and further work around the 501s is one of those things. But the acknowledgement on the Australian side that actually some of the people that we are talking about have had a long history in Australia. Some of them have been there since they were very young children, and sending them to New Zealand when they have no connections here other than a very historic one isn't really a fair or just outcome. I think the acknowledgement of that by the Australians is very, very welcome. And it is a sign that, we're working constructively together.
It sounds like you do want Australia to go further though, and is that something that you will be raising with Albanese?
I'm sure it will be an ongoing topic of conversation, as a range of other issues are. The New Zealand government has also been working with Australia on the, just the general treatment of New Zealanders living in Australia, and we'll talk about those sorts of things as well.
And just back on the EQC fund, do you know how much is in there at the moment?
I don't have, sorry.
And it was quite obviously quite depleted under Paikoura.
It has been rebuilding, and I can come back to you with the exact number. Obviously, as we always do, if there's a need to top it up when an immediate disaster or emergency occurs, that's what governments do. In terms of your earlier question, I know that some people won't have caught up with the fact that one of the changes out of the Royal Commission from Christchurch is that the initial response is all dealt with now by insurance companies, so that it's much more streamlined, and then they in turn work with EQC. So we are seeing right now people who've had slips and so on around their homes, the work they're doing with insurance companies is what they would have done in the past with EQC.
Is there a tension, I guess, between insurance companies wanting the EQC to kick in and EQC itself? Is there any sort of tension?
No, I don't believe so. The process has been already used in Westport when there were issues there, and it worked very, very well indeed. The insurance companies obviously have to make clear what they're telling EQC is needed, and they have to be able to justify that. But I actually think it's a much better process for those who are experiencing the disaster. They're not having to double handle, and talk to many people in Christchurch, they'll tell you how difficult and challenging that was. So in the situations that are happening here, my understanding, and we've been talking to the insurers and EQC have as well, is that the process is running relatively well.
Have you had any numbers come across your desk of what New Zealand is looking at the damage here?
As a country overall, look, in terms of the insurance claims, it's still fairly early days in that regard, but the companies are signalling that this will be the biggest, certainly the biggest non-earthquake event that New Zealand has probably seen in terms of insurance, and significant, not as big as the Kaikoura number of claims, but certainly a very, very significant event. What's that?
Can we afford this?
Of course we can, because our job is to protect New Zealanders. And while the EQC fund is one element, as I say, governments always have topped that up if they need to do that. Our job is to look after people, help people recover. Insurance is a very important part of that, which obviously is not directly funded by the government. But as you've seen today, there are a lot of other things we can do to support people.
Just on inflation, would you be concerned if the floods saw construction costs, furniture costs, insurance costs increase, and then the Reserve Bank have to come in and put up mortgage rates to try and in response?
Look, it's very early days to be able to make that judgment, and I've seen some statistics today about people's projections around what they think might happen with construction costs. I don't think we can say for sure that that is happening now. Of course I don't want to see the cost of construction go up and it further fuel inflation, but there's a bit of water to go under the bridge until we can know whether that has occurred.
So can I just ask you about bus drivers?
Yes.
We've seen them drive through the floods on Friday to get people home safely. But this morning we've had more flooding in Munihunga. There's pictures of bus drivers in quite high water. I know that you're not AT, but you're Minister of Transport. What do you make of the job that bus drivers are doing at the moment?
Well, the first comment I would just make is a huge thank you to the bus drivers who have gone over and above to keep people connected through what's been a crisis period for our city. They've done an extraordinary job under real pressure, as they have for the past couple of years. It is really important as those services are delivered that it is done safely, both for drivers but also for passengers as well. That's something I'll keep in touch with Auckland Transport about, and I also have regular engagement with the key unions who represent those drivers, and it's something I'll raise with
Are
them.
the unions saying anything to you about safety?
I haven't had any concerns expressed to me yet, but I do intend to talk to them shortly.
And as Minister for Auckland, a lot of people are looking at stormwater and it's just sort of not recovering. When are you going to get to work on the stormwater in Auckland?
I think it's important to note that in the first instance we are currently still in an emergency phase, and so it's important that we're working with authorities on how we get through this emergency period and then keep people safe. I'll commence my work, which will really be working with other ministers, local government, community and business leaders on the recovery once we get through that emergency phase. Obviously, when it comes to water infrastructure, that has been a significant focus for our government. We've spoken extensively about the fact that in many parts of New Zealand there has been an underinvestment in the water infrastructure that we need to keep our cities and our regions safe. That is a topic we will have to pick up after this event, but it's certainly a topic that our government is well aware of and is investing in and making changes to make sure that Kiwis have safe drinking water and we have big enough pipes to deal with the events that are going to come our way as a part of climate change.
Prime Minister, a question on crisis management. As you'll know from your COVID years, a key is strong political leadership, clear messages. What is your view of the conduct of Auckland's mayor at this point in the crisis, bagging the media, saying he doesn't need to talk to anyone?
As I've indicated, I respect the fact that the Mayor of Auckland was elected by the people of Auckland, and my responsibility as Prime Minister is to work with whomever the people of Auckland elect to represent them, and that's what I will continue to do.
But does it undermine the considerable effort that the government is putting into this crisis that he is nominally the head of?
Look, it's not up to, it's not for me to provide a running commentary on the performance of any of our local government figures, and I don't intend to get into that territory.
But you've just appointed a Minister for Auckland, which could be a tacit indication of how you think that he's doing his job.
My decision to appoint a Minister for Auckland was an acknowledgement that actually the government, the central government, has a big job here in Auckland. We've got a lot of work going on in Auckland, and I want to make sure that that is streamlined and coherent. And I think that Michael is the right person to make sure that we're doing that.
Prime Minister, is climate change your generation's nuclear-free moment?
Well, I agree with the sentiment expressed by Jacinda Ardern. There's absolutely no question. We have to rise to the challenge of addressing climate change. Nothing that's happened in the last couple of weeks has changed that reality.
Then how in good conscience can a government cut the price of fuel?
Well, I think I've just canvassed all of that. There are people who still need to fill up their car on a daily basis in order to continue to live and continue to function. With the significant increase in the cost of fuel that we've encountered recently, that's putting household budgets under a lot of pressure. That does not mean that we're taking our foot off the accelerator when it comes, if you'll excuse the pun, when it comes to reducing emissions.
Of an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
Prime Minister, the opposition said yesterday that the closure of schools was like a shadow lockdown and unnecessary intrusion on people's lives. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't know if they've noticed, but there's a significant natural emergency happening in Auckland at the moment, and our priority has to be making sure that we're keeping people safe, making sure that we're taking pressure off all of those entities that need to be responding to that emergency. And of course, we will review the situation around schools on a daily basis. We want kids back in school as quickly as possible, but I think likening it to a COVID-19 lockdown is simplistic and kind of not really appropriate in the circumstances.
Prime Minister, you were in Whangarei this morning. That emergency centre was set up on Sunday, 2 nights after flooding hit Whangarei. Do you think that was good enough for the people who didn't have homes, who didn't have bedding, and who had to just live in cars?
Look, as I've indicated ever since Saturday, there'll be an opportunity to reflect on that first 24 to 48 hour period to consider what went well, what could have been done better, and there'll be an opportunity to do that once we're through the emergency response. Right now we're still in the emergency response. I don't want the people doing that emergency response to be having to feel that they have to go back 4 days and be explaining what happened 4 days ago when they should be focused on what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 days. So that's where I want their focus to be at the moment. We will go back though and make sure there's a thorough review of what happened, and that will include at all levels, but now is not the time for that.
What needs to be done after visiting Whangarei today? Any changes needed?
Oh, like I've said, I want to acknowledge the grassroots community support for those kind of initiatives. They make such a difference at a local level. They support people through extraordinary circumstances. At a central government level, we will continue to look at how we can best support those kind of local community responses, because actually they are the ones that can be stood up the fastest, and they're the ones that can provide that most immediate support. We're doing that with, if you look at all of the government agencies that are represented there, people can go in there and they can get everything that they might need from central government all in one place. So they can talk to MSD about civil defence payments, they can talk to Kāinga Ora about housing needs. All of those things are there, along with a whole lot of other providers. The electricity companies all represented there, insurance companies represented there. So it's about making sure that we're supporting people through. So those kind of local initiatives are probably the thing that's going to make the biggest difference in the immediate response phase.
You faced a natural disaster crisis very early on in your Prime Ministership. How would you reflect on that experience? How's it been for you?
It's been a busy couple of weeks, it would be fair to say, but that's the nature of the job. As I indicated a couple of days ago, you don't always get to choose the things that you want to work on or the things that you want to prioritise on a daily basis when you are the Prime Minister. Sometimes you have to respond to the events that are in front of you.
Unemployment's on the rise. How does that sit with you?
Well, look, I think let's look at the numbers. The overall labour force, the overall number of people available to work has increased. There's actually 4,000 more people in work, in the latest numbers. There's 4,000 more unemployed, but that's a sign of the fact that the overall pool of available workers has increased. All right, thanks everybody.